So much of our branding has gone online, and platforms like social media is getting increasingly important. Is it enough that we post on the likes of LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram? What is the future of social media branding? Hi, this is Takatoshi Shibayama, the host of the Future Design Podcast. In this episode, I have Eugene Capon. He calls himself the social media futurist. He's worked for many years in design, marketing, and branding, and now he's the CEO of Studio Capon, an XR content creation and marketing firm. He's known to have created the first TV-style VR talk show, Glitched. He's going to tell us where he thinks social media branding is heading and how VR technology collides into that. So stick around to the end. Well, thank you, Eugene, for being on our show. In this podcast, I love to talk about personal branding, and I think right now a lot of people are discovering that jobs are not very easy to find, and being able to brand yourself, create a business for yourself is very important. I especially find that these days as well, as I'm becoming quite senior, and it's not that it's easy to find many businesses in the world to apply for. So personal branding is something that in this podcast as well I've talked about, and in the same episode I could get to talk about VR, which is something that you're really excited about and you're working on. So super excited. Thank you for being on our show.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Awesome. So let's drop this first question. Is who is Eugene Capon, who's working on VR?
Eugene Capon.
Yeah.
I'm a social media futurist, a public speaker, and I've been a content creator on social media for about a decade. I'm one of the only people I've ever met who actually has a 4-year college degree in YouTube studies.
Right. I never heard of that. Is there an actual academy or a curriculum on YouTube studies?
So YouTube has a certification program that used to be available to everybody. Now it's not. There are actually a bunch of hoops and basically a lot of more qualifications that you have to be actually to take the certification to get it. What I did was I found a college that basically has a build your own curriculum. I went to a college called Evergreen State. It's best known for turning out such notable personalities as the pop artist Macklemore and Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons and Futurama. So when I was there, I was like, hey, this YouTube thing seems to be where everything is moving. That's what I want to study. And so I went there, I transferred over my credits, and I basically did 1 year of preset courses and 1 year of independent study where I was just able to study things like advanced physics, online marketing, film production, and I was spending my time on a YouTube channel called Comic Shop TV at the time as a senior editor.
What got you really interested in the world of YouTube and personal branding and videoing yourself?
I kind of fell into it. When I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And when I graduated from high school, I remember that first summer, I had no plans. I had no future whatsoever as far as plans went. And my mom walked in and was like, hey, kid, are you going to go to college? And I was like, I don't know if that's for me. And she went, hey, I'll pay for 2 quarters. You take whatever you want and just go. And I was like, all right. So this was in 2004. And I sat down with a counselor and I was like, hey man, I don't know what I should be taking. He said, what are you interested in? I said, I like making arts. And he was like, all right, we can sign you up for art classes. And I said, well, I don't want to live at home for the rest of my life. He goes, commercial art. A little bit of a difference. So he signed me up for a bunch of graphic design and web design classes. And it was this weird evolution of focus and study. So when you start learning typography and color theory, you're like, all right, graphic arts, that's great. And then you start learning web design because it's related, right? So I started to learn how to code and how to put together websites. And back in the day, there was this thing called Flash animation, which you could use to build websites. And I was like, all right, let's make cartoons. So I signed up for this Flash animation class that was teaching the software, and everybody was like, I'm going to build a website, or I'm going to build a 30-second animation. I was like, I'm going to make an 8-minute independent short. And they're like, are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, yeah. And so I wrote and animated and hand painted in Photoshop this 8-minute independent short called A Midnight Visit. And a year later, I put it onto Newgrounds and actually took their 5th place Daily Value Award for writing, because it was this weird introspective piece about like, what is humanity and what is really the concept of evil to man. It was really, a fun piece to do. But when I got done, it was 2008, and the US economy crashed and nobody was hiring, right? So I'm this kid, I get out of college, I don't know what I want to do. And I spent about 2 years just hustling and grinding, trying to find anything to build up my portfolio because nobody's hiring. And it took me a long time to kind of go through this process of continuously reinventing myself as a creator and as a person who was offering these services to other people. And I think I originally went with the name Misguided Youth Productions, which when I submitted all the legal paperwork, I actually got the county calling me up to ask if I was a porn company, right? So I was like, no, I'm a graphic artist. I'm a web designer. I do a little bit of animation. And that's when YouTube really caught my attention. I was like, hey, making YouTube videos seems really fun. About 2006, 2006, I got an internship finally at a digital signage company called Curiosity. And it was an unpaid internship. It was 70 hours a week, and it was 2 hours away from my home. So Monday through Friday, I was sleeping on the couch in the lobby at this place where I was doing my internship. And I basically rebranded this entire company. I built all the videos teaching people how to build content for these digital displays. I got to create animated digital signage for companies like In-N-Out Burger, McDonald's, Jack in the Box, because those were the companies that were buying this sort of technology. And once my internship was over, they actually hired me as an art director. And so I went from an internship to an art director in about 3 months once I got the chance. And nobody had really given me a chance before as far as being able to create in this capacity. And that's really where I flourished. I was like, all right, so creating, branding, marketing, that seems to be where my talents kind of sit. And when I was doing this, a friend of mine from college wrote a movie called Justice Never Reloads. And this movie was his like college development, indie short that he was doing. And he asked me to help with the marketing and branding for this project. I said, absolutely. And when I did it, they were like, well, this is really impressive. Do you want to be in this movie? Do you want to roll? And I said, as what? And he said, Warehouse Thug number 2. Right? So I did this role as Warehouse Thug number 2, and it's a hilarious scene. They put me in this like glam rock wig, and I had a leather jacket, and I was like in my early 20s, so I was, 6-pack and abs and not that way anymore, right? I would hate to do a push-up in public now, but I didn't know I could act, and nobody else did. I just thought I was like helping out and filling in with the role. And this scene, they threw a cup of Coca-Cola in my face, which was supposed to be hot coffee. It was like a buddy cop movie, and they're fighting bad guys, right? So I'm on the ground, I'm screaming, pretending my face is getting burned. They're like, stopped to have to check on me. I'm like, no, this is what you guys wanted, right? They're like, yo, keep rolling. And because I worked on this movie as a both a creative working on the branding and the marketing and the website and all those pieces, and as an actor, I got to sit on the panels whenever I went to film festivals. And I got to talk about the process of creating things bigger than myself, which is what really interested me. And having that experience, I was like, this is the greatest feeling in the world. How do I keep this going? And a friend of mine from Boy Scouts when I was a kid married a very famous YouTuber named It's Judy Time. And so I call up my buddy Benji. I was like, Benji, man, you got to show me how this YouTube thing works. Cause I feel like this is where it's all going. He said, absolutely. Come in, I'll take a look at what you got and give you some direction. And Benji actually has the number one YouTube secrets book that you can buy online. He has an Amazon bestseller talking about YouTube. And I was like, man, I was getting advice from this kid long before he became, video influencers, right? And I was like, this is great. I feel like that information was very introductory. I need to know more. And so that's when I enrolled into Evergreen State. And I did my 2 years there and got my bachelor's degree in YouTube studies.
And what was the inspiration for you to keep doing this? I mean, obviously, we're all kind of in a similar situation right now during the COVID situation, and I'm sure there's a lot of the listeners out there that are struggling to find jobs. And you seem like you had a lot of grit in finding and pursuing your passion, right? So, where's that kind of internal fire comes from?
I just think I'm a scrappy individual. I grew up on an Indian reservation looking like this, right? So as far as where I grew up, I was definitely considered a minority. And when there aren't a ton of people that look just like you, and nobody's really giving you that association chance, I feel like that kind of gets instilled in you, gets ingrained, and then you want to go out and prove everybody wrong. And if you do that long enough, it becomes part of you and part of your personality. So there's this kind of what is it perception that if you go to Yale, if you come from a really good family, if you come from money, that you're going to be successful. And yeah, but a lot of those things that made them successful, they were just handed. Give me some kid who sold drugs for 2 years, and I'll show you what real grind is.
I could totally relate to that because when I moved to the U.S. when I was five, I grew up in this area called Lake Grove in Long Island, New York. And during that time back in the early 80s, it was completely white. You know, there was no Asian kids around, and it was just me. And then after when I moved back to Japan, I didn't really speak Japanese very well. So I got like really bullied and tried to kind of, get through it. The face doesn't even matter, right? I mean, it's it's not even about race or anything at that point. It's about
You didn't show up with like tattoos or anything.
no, I didn't show up as tattoos or anything, but I had this, strange Japanese accent. Everybody was trying to learn English and, I spoke fluently. So, just people didn't really like me for that. So these kind of, experiences that you have when you're a child and you're faced with adversity, you do create that huge, passion in yourself to take no shit. And I think that's what really drives people, even, throughout their adulthood. You still have that, you know, distinguishable like fire in you. And I really relate to you about that. And finding, your true passion about, arts and creativity and using that to become a YouTube star or something personal brand that you create is something that's very admirable. And how did you go about creating this yourself, the Eugene that you are today?
I would say it's a long, long process that takes years to develop who you actually want to be in front of the camera. And it's really up to you to try as many things as you can, fail as fast as you can, pivot, and then continue on until you have to pivot again. I would say failure is absolutely one of the best things you can do for yourself. I mean, Studio Capon, which is the company that I own, isn't my first company. I owned a company before this called Ensobers, and we were trying to build technology specifically for the real estate industry. So real estate agents could create 360 house tours directly off their smartphones. Now we had to close our doors because we went bankrupt, and it wasn't because it was fault leadership. It was just we couldn't develop the software fast enough for the amount of churn that we had. Like we were just burning through money too fast to actually keep it going, and that's okay. I mean, that in itself was worth the $15,000 that I had lost, right? I would say that's probably my second round of education. And so when it comes to things like rebranding, it's 100% okay to have one version of yourself for a long time. And if it doesn't feel right or it doesn't feel like this is who you are anymore, it's okay to pivot. It's okay to rebrand just slightly and go, hey, I used to be about, science, right? I used to be about science, everything about science. Oh, but you know what? All my study is more about mathematics and rockets. So you know what? I'm going to pivot. I'm not going to be about science. I'm going to be about rockets and science. So let's talk about, inertia. Let's talk about like SpaceX. Let's talk about NASA. Let's talk about if there's life on other planets, because that is your new brand.
And then a lot of times we talk about personal stories and getting your face out there these days way more than, let's say, 20 odd years ago, when corporations can be a certain color, or it could be a certain trademark, but now it's not enough, and you have to have a face to it. Obviously we could talk about tech companies, leaders of that being the face of their companies, and more these days that people need to show their face and create your own brand message persona as well. And how do you go about doing that?
Oh, that's easy. You define what your message is, what your brand message is, and then you talk about it. You create content around you talking about it. You show up onto podcasts such as the Future Design podcast, and you talk about whatever your particular brand message is. And you're absolutely right. It used to be, companies would spend millions upon millions of dollars to develop their brand and their iconography. And I gotta say, I was thinking about this the other day. The Coca-Cola logo is terrible, right? But they spent millions of dollars teaching people how to like recognize it. But if you ask somebody to like sit down and try to draw it perfectly, odds are they're probably not going to be able to do it. But again, if you ask somebody to draw the Nike logo, that's perfect.
Agreed.
But again, that's all like 70s, 80s, early 90s, old school revelry. And I think guys like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates actually changed how that works. Like everybody knows Microsoft, but everybody associates that with the name Bill Gates because he was the founder. He was the guy who ran it and ran it successfully into one of the most successful tech companies to ever exist. Bill Gates, the same way. Elon Musk, the same way. And if you have a company that has a product, and you definitely have to have a relationship with the community of people to get them passionate about said brand, you're going to need a personality behind it. That's why companies hire spokespeople. I mean, if you were going to talk about, AT&T, you probably think of the "Can you hear me now" guy, right? Even though Sprint went ahead and spent a lot of money to like grab him and be like, "Yeah, I used to be, talking about AT&T. Now I'm talking about Sprint," right? So there's a little bit of politics behind there. It's really interesting to me.
And why do you think, in particular, tech companies are very good at it? Because, my kind of guess is maybe it's something that's so intangible and you can't really put a real product, a tangible product in front of you and say, this is my product. Do you think that that's why it is? Because I think nowadays a lot of companies are becoming more and more in the tech space, and obviously, if there's no tech element to your business, it's very hard to survive. And so, for the people who are, at least joining industries or already in the industry and business leaders, they're going to be confronted with trying to brand themselves, and it's becoming more and more intangible these days. Do you think that's why they need to really get that personal message out, the personal brand out?
I think tech companies do it really, really well because they like their whole job is to one, yes, create technology, but it's two, to innovate, right? And so they're going to take that approach to many different facets within their company. And if you have a bunch of innovative marketing people on staff, that's where things get really interesting. Anytime you meet like a marketing student entering the field or starting a business, they're always the face of their company, even though they probably hire out a team if they've grown enough, right? And they're trying to keep that brand message. They're trying to keep that level of innovation and professionalism and trying to create that connection and community. And so something that's something I've noticed in the last couple of years, that whenever you have internet personalities who do it really, really well and teach how to be a YouTuber or a social media specialist, they usually have some sort of background in marketing. Have you noticed that?
For sure. I mean, they're so good at it. I mean, I think, for me, I have absolutely no background in marketing or anything related to that. So for me, like, to think about how do I brand this podcast or how do I brand my business was very hard because I have to think about it from scratch and obviously watch different YouTubes and see how people are doing it. But if you had a background in marketing, then maybe you're starting at a much higher level than most people out there.
You're starting at the 50 mark while everyone's starting at zero.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Definitely. That's why I think having a bachelor's degree in YouTube studies was so integral to me creating myself on the internet as a YouTuber or a social media futurist now. And I didn't always call myself a social media futurist. That's actually a relatively new title that I decided to give myself this past year, because there are so many people on the internet already who teach people how to be YouTubers, how to be marketers, how to be salespeople, and I'm like, okay, how do I separate myself from all those people that already exist? Well, I talk about social media, I talk about branding, and I talk about technology. And I specifically talk about where those things are headed. Most importantly, to the metaverse, which is the eventual replacement of the internet. So I'm talking about the evolution of social media, not just what's available right now. And so, Social Media Futurist was the perfect title for what I do. And not everybody's going to have that same background as me when they're trying to rebrand themselves or create that presence as a tech entrepreneur or a marketer, or try to give themselves that kind of branding.
But the thing is, most people who are out there trying to brand themselves or launch a company, they're not going to go back to school and learn 4 years of how to do marketing or spend numerous hours learning how to market themselves to start while they're actually starting a business or already in a leadership position. So how do people really fast track that? How do you try hack that quickly?
So I just did a video on this. There's a entrepreneurial method or a leadership method called low effort, high efficiency. And it basically states that if you are charging, say, $100 an hour for a service, say you're a graphic artist and you charge $100 an hour, but you only have a 40-hour work week, right? And part of that 40-hour work week is you have 10 hours of just busy work, which is sending invoices, setting up meetings, getting spec sheets done for different projects. And you're like, you know what? If I didn't have to spend that 10 hours doing all that busy work, I could spend that additional 10 hours doing billable services. So I'm going to hire somebody for $20 an hour to take care of that 10 hours worth of work a week for me. And that means you're spending $200 and you're bringing in an additional $800 in profit for yourself. Marketing is the exact same way. If that is not something that is in your wheelhouse, what you should do is you should find somebody who is wired to do that, who does have the training to do that, who does have the educational background to do it. Hire them because they're going to be able to do it in a shorter time frame than you and more efficiently than you. Especially since you don't want to spend all this time learning how to do it from YouTube videos. You're going to spend what, 40, 50 hours learning how to do all this stuff? Or you could hire somebody for 10 hours to do it for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the outsourcing of social media marketing and all these things, I get pitched all the time on LinkedIn and different sources, and I definitely see the benefit of hiring somebody else. I mean, when I do my own podcast marketing, I mean, I do hire somebody to create all the collaterals and visuals for social media marketing, but you still have to learn how to be a great speaker, use different technology to make a better version of yourself. And this is kind of how I want to lead into the world of extended reality or VR stuff that you're working on. So now there's so many YouTubers out there, there's so many leaders using social media marketing to advertise themselves, but now I think we need to step in a little bit further. And what I see now is these ARs and VRs of the world trying to make a little bit of difference or differentiate themselves to kind of change not change, uplift their image. And you've been pioneering in that sector. So what got you really into this VR technology?
I've always been in favor for storytelling. And I always felt like, even though I was very passionate about YouTube videos, there wasn't the functionality that I wish it had. Now, both my parents are doctors. I wasn't allowed to have a video game system until I was 18 because they thought, it made kids angry, which is a whole nother story.
Even until my 40s, I still haven't owned a game console in my life, so that's pretty rare.
Have you ever played like computer games or anything?
Not really. So my younger brother owned a Game Boy back in like the 80s, and I played on that a little bit. But I mean, I have never really gone into the world of gaming at all. I kind of like playing sports and going outside and doing different things. So even though I was born in a generation where Nintendo was created and everybody was playing with it, I never really got into it. But now I'm at a level where like a 5-year-old can kick my ass in Street Fighter. So
Okay, so let me ask you this. But you probably watch a lot of movies, right?
of course, of course.
Have you ever watched a movie that had a choose your own adventure, or different avenues of which you can watch?
There was a Black Mirror movie that was like a choose your own adventure. I mean, yeah, exactly that one.
So I've actually talked to the team that developed the system for the choose your own pathway adventure for Bandersnatch, and they're super passionate about how the technology is influenced and kind of the psychology that goes behind, creating those choices, because some of them are like very logical and then other ones just take you completely off the rail from the storyline, right? And that was something I always wanted for my own storytelling. So YouTube actually used to have the capability to do a choose your own lane or choose your next video and through choices, and they don't have that anymore, which is kind of saddening. They took that functionality away, and so I'm like, okay, how do you do that? Well, video games would be the next evolutional step for that, right? So you could go through like a 360 video, you could create different points within the 360 video, and you could be like, go through door number one, door number two, or door number three. And that's what really interested me in virtual reality. One of my co-hosts for the VR talk show that we sold as if it was a TV show, Topher Welsh, he co-run him and I co-run this motion design user group here in the United States, which is the biggest motion design user group in the United States. It's After Effects Seattle. It takes place at the Fremont Adobe campus once a month. We're not doing it right now because of COVID, but we get people who are so innovative come to this group and come to this meetup, and a lot of the times they want to show off the things that they're doing. And there was this guy who had this very entry level VR experience that was Disney's Iron Giant, and it would walk over, it would pick you up, and it would walk with, and I was so used to doing YouTube videos that it was always static. You couldn't look around. And I tried this experience and my mind was blown. I took off the headset. I was like covered in sweat. I was like, this is the future. Oh my God. And when I got out of college, I was working at a YouTube consulting agency as an art director. And when I discovered virtual reality, I knew I had to make that change. I was like, this is what I've been waiting for my entire career. Because, like when I said earlier, I was so fascinated by graphic design that I started evolving to until I got to like filmmaking. I graphic designer, web designer, flash animation, film production, right? And the next step of that, it didn't exist, right? Once you got to filmmaking, that was the stop. And so suddenly 360 filmmaking and VR became a thing. I was like, that's how I continue on. That's how I rebrand myself. That's how I basically see where social media is going to go. And I rebrand myself as a social media futurist, right? And so just to tie it in, I think VR, even though it's very much still a new technology, or at least this current version of it, this current wave of VR is still so new. And we're still trying to define what it can be, what it should be, and how we can start using it in our everyday lives. I think COVID is a perfect case for how it could be part of our, everyday society. I think putting on a VR headset and joining a team meeting and looking around where everybody's in avatars that match their personalities, I I think that could be a great experience in itself. I think taking what once could have been an indie film or a YouTube video is now a 360 video or an interactive uh, experience in itself. And just watching this whole evolution is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of VRs. I mean, obviously for gaming as well. I had to try it out, and it was really immersive. And there was a place in Singapore where we can go out and shoot laser guns and doing fun stuff using VR goggles, and that was really fun. And I also see a lot of educational material being done on VR, being or like news sources, and people being able to experience what people are experiencing, let's say in like Syria or something, and seeing all these bombs going off of you. And I think that those are very educational purposes of using VR, or like disaster management, these simulations on how to.
When you said bombs being dropped on Syria, are you talking about the Nani de la Pena experience?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think those are kind of really interesting ways to use VR, because I actually really didn't think about it, but it helps people understand what's really going on, because a lot of times you just read it on a newspaper or like a YouTube video, but you actually, if you don't really feel what's really going on, it's hard to be very compassionate about it. And I think that's really necessary for people, because we're so bombarded with many different information, and we just kind of like consume it like whatever, and then just kind of passes through. But if you really experience what people are experiencing, or half experience at least of that level, then I think it does help people to really feel what's going on, understand what's going on, and try to be compassionate about it. But you're in the world of social media, and I'm trying to tie that down, and I think a lot of listeners are very interested about how social media and VR comes together. So can you take us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, so it was really interesting that you mentioned bombs dropping on Syria and refugees. Um, when I first jumped into the VR industry, there was no industry, right? So I was following everybody I could and trying to volunteer at every event just so I could be closer to the action. And I volunteered for an event called SIFX. And I originally applied to go help because I thought I'd get to try VR games that hadn't been released yet, right? And when I got there, it was these six experiences by Nani de la Pena that I was helping people get into. And one was that experience that you mentioned. There was a domestic abuse experience where the audio was from a real 911 call. There was one that was it was a 360 video reenactment of somebody starving to death while in line at a food bank.
Yeah.
There was a experience where you were a woman going to Planned Parenthood for an abortion. I mean, all of these experiences are incredibly um, empathetic, and it puts you into these positions that you might not, have as part of your life. And I think that's part of empathy, is trying to put ourselves into other people's shoes. And with the way that VR actually affects the way that you think and the way you remember um, those pieces of content, I think can affect you greatly. I saw guys who would be like, "Bro, let's go do like VR. It's so cool," and then they would come out and be like, "Man, women are people too. I need to call my mom." It's just like it's very eye opening, and I think if you have the chance to try experiences like that, you should. Not because it's fun, but because it makes you more aware of the world around you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of ethical teachings that you can do on that as well. Let's say you're a small child and you experience being bullied by a big guy, or you're a woman and being raped by some other guy, or there's a lot of things that or like let's say you and I are both grown men, but wouldn't know what it feels like to be a small child anymore, or like being a woman or pregnant woman, or I mean, there's many things that we can learn from this VR. So I really find that that educational aspect and the ethical education that we can get from VR is super important in the future.
And when we talk about virtual reality to social media, I mean, there are social VR platforms available, such as High Fidelity and Altspace and VR Chat. And something that's really cool about them is people are creating social media videos and content around being in those environments, and through a process we call dimensionality reduced content. And it's really interesting to see what comes out of those experiences, because honestly, they can be anybody. There's this area in VR chats where it was all these people who were in this like Western town, and they were like running around firing guns at each other. And there was some kid who had to be like 5 or 6 who was in a VR headset. And these people were so intrigued by this kid's like innocence with being in here. He's like, I'm going to throw this bomb over here so it doesn't hurt anybody, even though that completely broke the way that the experience was built, right? And it was so adorable. I'm like, okay, this version of social media isn't just virtual. It's almost putting people in the same room over long distances. And I think that's really what we can get out of it, even though we create different games out of it, right?
And then let's say we would just step out of like games and educational stuff, and you're doing things on personal branding. I mean, how does VR really help personal branding? Because I've seen your glitch, and you three guys were talking, in like avatars, and you were, talking about certain things, and I think that was a podcast, but it was in a setting where you were on a stage, and then there was an actual audience. But in the VR as well, there was an actual audience. So how's that much better than what we have in reality? I mean, how does that really help personal branding?
First off, for anybody who's listening who has never seen the show, the Glitched, a VR talk show, is the first in virtual reality talk show to ever be ordered as if it was a TV show, and it actually ran for 3 seasons. One on Allspace, which is owned by Microsoft, and uh, seasons 2 and 3 were on High Fidelity, which used to be Second Life back in the day. Philip Rosedale and his team ordered 2 seasons from us, and that's what kind of made us special. And when we talk about branding, yes, the show in itself is branded. We created an image, color guide. We have an IMDb credit for doing this like show, where it's just Topher and I high fiving the logo and basically what our idea of what the metaverse kind of symbolically looks like. And we had amazing high profile guests in it. We had like iJustine. We had Jake Jake Roper from Vsauce 3. We had Barnacules Nerdgasm as guests. We had all these amazing personalities in here, and we had to abide by what they looked like in each one of those experiences. So when people saw us, we actually look like ourselves because we flew down to Los Angeles. We went to Beverly Hills and we got what's called a duplication scan, which is just a fancy term for photogrammetry avatar of ourselves. And I kind of feel bad that I didn't lose a ton of weight before I did that, because now that avatar is forever fat. But when I'm in virtual reality, I want to be myself. I don't want to look like anybody else. I want my jacket and my glasses and my Converse shoes to be part of my image. Um, when people leave the house, when certain personalities leave their house, they only have a set uniform, right? When you see Mark Zuckerberg, it's the gray t shirt and the black hoodie, and he owns a stockpile of them because that's his personal uniform. That is part of the brand. That is part of who he is as a tech minimalist, right? And so self identity inside of virtual reality is incredibly important. And I don't think we talk enough about what that is. When we talk about the metaverse, we talk about this replacement of the internet where everybody's going through their daily life, putting on a VR headset, being themselves or whatever that version of themselves needs to be represented by. So, are you a video game character who's 12 feet tall and has the head of a wolf? You know, good job, Mr. Beast. Are you, a blonde tech guru in a pink hoodie with, a giant eye on your sleeve? Hey, iJustine, how are you? And do you have, big thick glasses, Converse, and a jacket? Hi, Eugene. Welcome to the internet. I enjoy your brand.
Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting. The way you want to project your image can be so different if you really want to get creative about it. But in terms of like people relating to you, obviously you could be like an anime character, or you could be a certain character as you wish. But how does that really, so beyond like me knowing you as Eugene, or the Eugene that has a werewolf face? I mean, how does that get me more attached to you than the reality of who Eugene is?
Well, the reality of who I am and who I am in VR is always going to be different. But, you're still going to get the same voice, right? You're still going to get the same set of features that I put forth into the VR experience. And my personality isn't going to change between who I am in real life and who I am in VR. So if we conducted conducted this interview in VR rather than over video or in person, my answers would be the exact same no matter what. I mean, this is who I am. This is who what my brand is, and this is who I would be in virtual reality, nevertheless.
And how do you think that technology is going to be more accessible to us? Because obviously you said you had to go into a studio and you had to get, kind of, what was that term that you used that you need to be,
Photogrammetry.
yeah, for grammatized or whatever you want to call it. And but that's not, you can't just do that at home, or you have to have like some kind of studio or something, right?
Yeah. So the technology is definitely being brought down every single year. I think there's a version of what we had to go through available on like smart pads, or if you take enough photos of yourself, you can take it, put it into a program, and get something very close, right?
Mm.
But then you have to still drop it into a 3D program, remove all your extra points that may have populated from the conversion. Then you have to put in a skeleton rig, and then you have to create blend shapes for the different facial features. And if you don't have a background in doing 3D art, you won't know to do this. So I definitely think there are programs that are going to be more available that you can just take your face, stick them onto an avatar, and then select your hair and outfit and change the colors. Kind of like, did you ever play? Well, you don't play video games, but do you know what Soul Calibur is?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's this video game that has some of the craziest customization uh, options out of any video game I've ever seen. To the point where people are just recreating other characters from other video games just to have them inside of this video game. And I think as we continue on, there will be better solutions as far as creating yourself in virtual reality or for video games in general.
And I think that right now our experience of VR is limited to goggles, and I've seen in the newer technologies that are contact lenses that you can put into your eyes, and you could see many things. Like it just kind of reminds me of Dragon Ball or something, that with the guy with the goggles, or like Terminator's eyes or something, and you can see all these things coming out. So do you think that that's kind of like what we're really going into, is like, now obviously wearables is a thing for sure, and having a AR, well, it could be a VR experience as well if you can change the lenses or something.
Do you know what the difference is between VR, AR, and MR is?
I don't know what MR is. AR, I know it's like, you mix it in with reality, and VR is a complete, a virtual world.
Yeah, yeah. So VR is always going to be you teleported to another world. MR is you teleported into another world.
Mm.
Very different. And then AR is just augmented reality in any of your senses.
Mm.
So the example I like to use is somebody gets a chip implanted in their tongue, and now everything tastes like ice cream no matter what it is, which sounds great, right?
Yeah.
Or you lost an arm and you have a prosthetic, but there are little chips in it so you can feel items now, right? So you're augmenting the reality of what your situation is.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the lenses, we talk about Lord of the Ring view is what I like to talk about.
Mm.
Where once we get to like 6G, where we have, I did the math at one point, and it's like 32 terabytes a second of information processing, or up to 32 terabytes. And at that point, what you would have are little lenses that sit over that maybe pair up with a smartphone. And they might have a camera in them. And that camera tracks everything around you and then replaces those textures into whatever environment you want in real time.
Mm.
Or at least so fast that we wouldn't be able to tell that there was a transference of information. So when you look at everybody, they might be in old world, Middle Earth garb and have pointy ears and wizard hats, and everything might, look like it was from an elvish tavern, right? So, and I think that's where you're talking about, and I think we're a long ways away from that, um, at least a decade. But technology is always doing these like little leaps and bounds. Where out of nowhere, some company created a more cost-effective way to do something. When we talk about VR headsets, none of them, except for the Varjo, are human eye tracking resolution, and that headset is 5 to 25 grand, I think, per headset.
That's really expensive. Yeah, but I think as anything, I mean, it follows the Moore's law, and everything kind of comes down in price. And obviously, we'll hit a point where it's very accessible to us, obviously. But during that transitional times, we are using VR goggles, and we're going to be using whatever. Well, I guess maybe with 5G, it changes quite a lot as well, because the information processing is going to be so much faster. So VR is going to be taking leaps and bounds using 5G. And do you have any insight into that?
So I think even with 5G, you might end up with a little bit of latency
Mm,
when you're talking about like long-term things, and that's what makes people sick.
mm.
Um, do you know what VR sickness is?
Yeah, yeah, I've tried it
Yeah.
before, and yeah, it's like
Okay.
5 minutes you get
For
nauseous.
for anybody at home who might be curious what VR sickness is, it's when you have a visual disconnect between what you're seeing and the inner ear fluid inside of your ear. So when you see yourself upside down and your inner ear fluid doesn't pick that up, your body basically goes, "Oh no, there's something wrong. I need to let my host know, or I need to let my body know." And so that's when people become nauseous and sick. So I think when we're talking about accessibility in terms of VR headsets, things like Google Stadia
Mm,
interest me a lot
mm,
because you have all this processing power behind the scenes,
mm.
and it's being pumped to your VR headset,
Right, right.
over the internet, right?
Mm,
But if we're unloading and reloading things and it's not fast enough to pick up when we turn our heads, you're still going to get that disconnect.
mm,
So VR headsets need to have a much wider view to basically occupy and give itself room for that load and unload, right?
mm,
But that's also why a lot of graphics look very cheesy right now
mm.
inside of VR headsets, right? They look low poly, or the textures have been like rendered down to look very cartoonish.
Mm,
And if we want those textures to become photogrammetry realistic, it's going to take a lot more processing power behind the scenes
mm,
and transference of that data to the headsets
mm.
to actually make it worthwhile. And so I don't think 5G is quite there yet. I feel like 6G is going to be, a better fit for, that level of realism.
Mm. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I never really thought about how many years ahead that this VR can be like something that's right out of a movie. But let me finish with what one last question is. Now that we have so many children, even probably us, are so addicted to technology these days, and we find more interesting stuff online than actually offline. Well, at least to me, it seems like it. And once we have this extended reality of worlds that we actually don't even see in this real life, I mean, is there a social concern about us not really being able to enjoy what real life is? I mean, the offline world is.
I don't think so. So every generation has this, concern that social media is going to ruin us. But if you go back 50 years ago, man, Elvis Presley sure shakes his hips erotically, right?
Yep. Yeah. John Lennon
Every
was dangerous, right?
every generation of parents who are unfamiliar with the cool new thing that pops up gets worried. I mean, my parents, part of the reason why I didn't have video games growing up is they thought video games made you angry and and violent. But we know now that's the exact opposite. I mean, a lot of politicians try to link school shootings, right, to video games, but there was a study done that actually showed if you are a school shooter, you're actually less likely to play video games.
Yeah, I remember one time that Twisted Sister was in front of Congress. I don't know if you know Twisted Sister. Yeah, but and they were asked if heavy metal music makes people violent or commit crimes, and that's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so I think if anything, virtual reality is a positive in a lot of ways. Yes, you can choose to view, terrible, terrible things that somebody else made, but you can choose that with any media platform, but whether it be a newspaper or a magazine or a VHS, right?
Mm.
And but what we should really be doing is looking at the positives, such as the level of empathy that you can get from wearing a VR headset and putting yourself into an experience where you might not be familiar with those level of circumstances. It's also a positive to note that you actually learn at a much faster rate inside of a VR headset. Um, there's this part of your brain called the hippocampus, and it's what its function is to do is to take short-term memory, convert it into long-term memory. And a couple of years ago, we found out that there are these things called GPS cells in your brain, in that section of the brain, and that is your evolutionary response to being able to find your way back to your home or your tribe or your cave, right?
Okay.
And when you're in VR, those GPS cells fire off more frequently and randomly. So it's estimated that you actually retain 30% more information inside of VR than in the real world. So I would be afraid that VR might replace traditional learning just because you can learn faster inside of VR, right?
Totally. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that definitely the future of education is about using these technologies, especially VR, because as we just discussed, there's immersive experiences that you can get out of it, and which is more impactful into our kind of minds and emotions that it sticks with us a lot longer than just reading a textbook. And for sure that many different things can really come out of this VR, and I'm still looking forward to the day that VR and all these things are going to be the norm. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed this, and I love that we ended on a very positive note on this. And I'm sure a lot of people want to follow you. So could you tell us how people can follow you, what you're doing on VRs and social media?
Yeah, yeah. If you're interested in connecting with me, I have a speaker website called hightechinfluencer.com. If you're interested in seeing the stuff that my company is building, Studio Capon.com. Cap on like you put a hat on your head. And if you'd like to check out the 360 animated films that we've created for the internet that have gained me over 10 million views, youtube.com/Studio Capon.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and really enjoyed this episode.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hi, this is your host Takatoshi Shibayama. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Now, if you enjoyed or disliked this show, please let me know by writing in the comment section. The only way I can improve or add value to you is through your voices. If there are any topics that you would like me to pick up, please also let me know in the comments. I'd love to start chatting with you all. And if you would like to continue watching the show, please subscribe. Thank you.